Welcome to the Cycle World Podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer, Editor-in-Chief. I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. Thanks for watching us, joining us on YouTube. You can also get this on Patreon without commercials. If you join us, become a member, become a paying member on Patreon and no commercials. And so you can get this and more content from us. Thanks for listening wherever you are. Today, we're going to be talking about modern lube oils. Oil. What is oil? What kind of oils do we like? Specifically, we seem to like synthetic oil, so we're going to focus on that today. And Kevin's obviously thought about this, and we all need it. We all need oil to have our dreams come true on motorcycles. It's everywhere, so it's really fundamental. Even your electric bikes need a little bit of oil. So let's get started, Kevin.
Oil and grease, yes.
Yeah.
Mechanical devices such as engines and gearboxes can't function without lubricant films to separate the surfaces in contact. And in order to dynamically separate surfaces, we have to provide a liquid that is swept into the loaded zone by the motion of the parts themselves as fast as the load squeezes this liquid out at the sides of the contact area. Now, the desired result is that the load doesn't touch the non-moving part of the assembly. There's no surface-to-surface contact.
I think our driving or riding a motorcycle analogy might be hydroplaning.
Yes,
on a puddle. The surfaces are not touching. That's great lubrication.
Only in that case, it's the inertia of the fluid that keeps it, drives it under the front tire and causes that feeling, which gets your attention. But of course, when it's easy to think of liquids as being like water. Water has very low friction within itself. What we need is a fluid that resists being squeezed out enough that it can separate the two surfaces as the motion continues, as between a piston and the cylinder wall, as between crankshaft journal and the bearing that supports it. And this friction we call viscosity. And viscosity is the resistance of layers of fluid to sliding over one another. And it's hard to imagine a fluid which, you're riding in a boat and you trail your fingers overside and you feel the cool water splashing past your little fingernails. And it doesn't, it's very insubstantial. But in this case, oils are fluids which are provided with enough viscosity to be useful in the task that I just described. And usually the production of a lubricant film is referred to as wedge formation, and it's easy to understand why, because if you imagine a piston sliding on a cylinder wall and the motion is causing fluid that's on the cylinder wall to be dragged under the advancing piston, why doesn't the fluid just squirt out at the sides and leave nothing? Well, we answered that already. It's viscosity that provides the resistance. But it does come out the sides of the bearing at some rate. So at the back of the bearing, a lot of fluid has been lost, so the film is thinner there. So we have a wedge-shaped film that is formed. Now, it's well known that oils lose viscosity as their temperature rises. If these oils, which consist of chain or ring structures of carbon atoms bonded to one another, each one bonded in turn to one or more hydrogen atoms, these chains I think of when we boil spaghetti, and you see these long, sinuous strands of spaghetti, each one touching 50 or 100 others. And you can see that there is going to be resistance to sliding over one another. And in the molecular case, that resistance is various random short-range attractions form and are broken as the strands slide over one another. That is the source of viscosity. As the temperature rises, those carbon structures begin, they have more energy. Temperature is a measure of molecular energy, so that they're less able to form those bonds and they slide over one another more easily. Well, what if the oil we choose is able to form lubricant films wedge-shaped? In the case of a round journal in a round bearing, the wedge is formed by the journal being pushed slightly offside so that the space between the journal and the bearing is tapered. So what if the viscosity declines so much as we rise to the operating temperature of the engine that the oil wedge no longer forms? Well, it makes the machine unviable. We can't use it. So that means that we have to provide a viscosity enough to fly the parts on this oil film at operating temperature. Now, the other problem is, of course, cold starting, because as the temperature of the lubricant declines, a number of mechanisms conspire to thicken it, to increase its viscosity, possibly to the point where the starter won't turn the engine. And what we're interested in, therefore, is the slope of the viscosity versus temperature line, which is called viscosity index. What we want is a high VI, viscosity index, such that not only can we cold start the engine, but when it warms up, the loads and surfaces that we've provided in the design of the engine are enough to maintain an oil film, and thus the whole mechanism does not scuff and seize. Now, what happens here is that there has been a great progress from the early days when oil was simply a certain range of boiling temperatures when they distilled crude oil in a distillation tower. And if the machinery to be lubricated was very hot and the loads were very high, for example, in air-cooled engines in summertime, we would want a more viscous oil so that as it lost viscosity, as it heated up, it would still be able to carry the load. But again, we have to bear in mind this concept of viscosity index. How fast does the lubricant lose viscosity as it warms up? Well, early oils, as I say, were just what boiled out of crude between two different temperatures. And petroleum consists of hundreds of different molecular structures. Most of them are hydrocarbons, that is, structures consisting of carbon and hydrogen atoms. When early oils became cold, they solidified. And if you look at early automobile engines in museums or at antique meets, you'll see that atop each cylinder head is a small petcock, normally closed. For cold starting, you open the petcocks and pour a few cc's of gasoline into each cylinder. Then you close the petcocks, waited a certain time, and then got on the crank and to see if you could turn the engine. If the gasoline had dissolved the solidified oil into a liquid again, you could proceed with your starting procedure and have a running engine. Well, they found that this congealing of oil at non-running temperatures was the result of wax formation. So they developed techniques to remove the wax, de-waxed oil. And at the appearance of each problem with an oil, chemists would be put on the job to come up with a solution. Another important task for oil is cooling, because if you put a drop of oil in a bearing, it fills the clearance space. Why do you need any more than that? Well, first of all, the load is going to squeeze the oil out at the sides of the bearing and it will be lost. So soon there will be no support to the revolving journal and the thing will overheat and seize. So the clearance is made slightly larger than it needs to be so that an excess amount of oil flows through the bearing as a coolant, so that the heat of friction in the oil, which is viscosity, is carried away rather than accumulating. This is such a problem in some kinds of racing engines. In Formula One, for example, they went back to the old practice of casting the bearing material on the connecting rod ID, because a separate C-shaped inserts put in to the bearing as the engine is assembled involved passing heat from the bearing into the rod, and the bearing insert and the rod are not in intimate contact.
They're not as one. And so,
You
yep,
have clamped them together very firmly for the very reason that you want heat generated in the rod and the bearing inserts to have somewhere to go. We've provided extra clearance in the bearing so that more oil will flow through and carry away some of the heat. But this practice of making the bearing metal, bonding it to the rod itself, is the way connecting rods were made more than 100 years ago. So it's back to fundamentals in
it's
that
like
area.
the old the Arial square 4 pouring your Babbitt.
Yes.
Scraping.
Well, Eugene Goodman at Velocet in the early 1920s decided
Does that even count as a drink? I don't know. You said it, not me.
We're not making the
Goodman.
rules here. It's our loyal supporters whose comments create community
and brighten my day, definitely.
Yes, indeed, brighten our days. Eugene Goodman, his company had been making two-strokes, and a former editor of Cycle World, David Edwards, had a Velocet two-stroke in his office. Goodman decides, if we're going to go the four-stroke route, let's look around and see what's hot. And they went to Brooklands and they went to the Alaman and whatnot, and they saw overhead cam. Okay, we'll have one of those. So they built an overhead cam single. And they provided it with pumped circulating oil system. Now, early motorcycles, you just added a couple of ounces of oil to the crankcase and relied upon splash to lubricate everything. And when you saw that there was no longer smoke trailing behind your bike, you gave a couple of strokes on a hand or foot operated pump, and fresh oil from a tank was delivered to the crankcase. And in this way, you barely stayed ahead of scuffing and seizure as your machine drew the destination toward you.
Well, I love on some of the old bikes the little percolator that they have so that you could see that oil is circulating. There's a little glass dome and a little pipe, and it goes psh, psh, and you can see it
Oh, yes, the
happening.
little pulses.
And if it starts to decline, then you go, oh, we might need a little, and you put some more back in there, and that's your. They call it a total loss, but it sticks around, on other things. You'll have some on your pants. I'm certain.
He noticed, Eugene Goodman noticed, that engines running with circulating oil, pumped recirculating oil, had a more level temperature distribution. In other words, the presence of the oil touching all the moving parts inside the engine cooled the hottest parts and it warmed the coolest parts. So this was a valuable function of the oil. So
Can we
uh,
pause and talk about the order of doing that and how that evolved? Because it's also happened in liquid cooling systems with ethylene glycol and water. Um,
sure.
Cooling the hottest parts first, pumping the oil to the hottest parts first to cool them and to bring the temperature, to normalize the temperature over the entire engine, like Kevin was talking about. And recently with Harley Davidson's Big Twin, the engine that they're now running also in their race bikes, the cooling system was redesigned, and it's no longer twin cooled, it's just cooled. They pump the a coolant to the rear cylinder head first because that one is blocked from airflow. So the coolest coolant hits that hot cylinder head and then normalizes the temperature as it travels forward back to the radiator through the front cylinder head, which is better cooled by air. And that's
Yeah.
what they're doing with oil in engines, is getting that oil up to a cylinder head and letting it rain down and bring it back to the crankcase from those hot
Let it rain
combustion areas,
down.
the exhaust bridge,
Yes, such
all the
as. And of course, as we know, in former times, uh, the 1200 Sportster had problems with exhaust valve seat uh, distortion. So they circulated oil through drillings in the cylinder head to correct that. Now, purely rational as opposed to emotional people would say, why didn't they just water cool that thing? The answer is
shut up.
people like it. Shut up. Very good. The answer is, of course, that people liked the Sportster because it was Sportster. And if it were given water cooling, it would become something else. It would lose some of its identity.
What if you water cooled it and made it a 60-degree V twin? Then how would you feel about it?
Ah, well,
We're saying this, so we're just making a joke because Harley Davidson announced very recently that they're bringing back the 883 air-cooled Sportster in some form. They've been
by
very coy
popular
about it.
acclaim.
And we have a very loyal and large Facebook following. They are active, and they're especially active when they're active. And let me tell you that an 883 Sportster post on Facebook is active. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of passion out there.
Well, the thing about 883 was it was a place to start. If you wanted to live the Harley life, if you wanted that sound, and there are millions who do, um, no matter how much the sport bike folks want to make fun of them. And of course, there's fun to be made because there are motorcycles whose power mainly goes into making characteristic noises rather than thrusting them down the road at a high rate of knots. And not everyone is sympathetic to that,
Well,
but the supporters are,
the
and
broad,
they,
yep,
by golly, yes.
The broad motorcycle culture has a vacant imprint in its mind that is shaped like a Sportster, shaped like a Big Twin, shaped like an FL from 1939. I mean, it's just there. And yeah, bringing that back, it clicks right in. It makes the sound. I will say again, the Sportster was its own unique thing from 2003, rubber mount, to now, or the last Sportster in 2022, I think. They sold 1,000,000. And again, on no technical merit, but definitely on an emotional merit. And they're good motorcycles. Don't get me wrong. They're not, but it's heavier than an MT-07 or an MT-09. It's not as agile, and yet it exists and it moves and people like it.
And
Anyway,
people are moved by it. Yes.
moved by it. And so it's back to the drillings. I asked one of the engineers, these drillings existed. I asked one of the engine guys, do you get any coking in those drillings? No coking. So that was good, because if you cook the oil too hot, it'll coke and it could plug up your little drillings and then
Just say no coking in an authoritative voice and the problem
yeah.
will be over with. Well, in the 1930s, Benelli had enough experience in racing that they saw that when their air-cooled race engines got pretty hot on a summer day, the oil lost enough viscosity to become a problem. What is the correct answer? Put in thicker oil or install an oil cooler? They patented it. Of course, the large aircraft piston engines droning overhead all had oil coolers. So that was an historical point. Then in the early 70s, when MV began to build truly modern air-cooled racing engines, they found it necessary to follow the trend of narrowing the valve angle, swinging the stems of the intake and exhaust valves toward one another, creating a flatter combustion chamber that lit up and burned more quickly. But in the old days, with the valves splayed far apart, in between there was plenty of room for cooling fins directly on top of the hot cylinder head. So how are you going to cool the cylinder head when the valve angle closes up and there's no place to put those fins? Oil. And that was the time when you began to see MV road race bikes with their front number plate drilled full of innumerable holes to feed air to an oil cooler directly behind them. So that was all in an attempt to keep oil from losing so much viscosity that it could no longer support the loads that it had to.
When should we talk about things like Velisets, where I really want to run a 2050, and particularly modern cars where you're doing 0-20, where they're really hammering down the asperities on the journals. Just want to say asperities.
Yes.
And because it's so interesting, there's so much chatter about it on the interwebs. 0-20 is ruining your engine, and the Toyota they're using 0-20 to meet CAFE to get the mileage standards, or lowering the viscosity of oil, tightening the clearances, and
Well,
making
you're
it work.
talking about multigrades.
Yeah. So yes.
The great thing, the reason why multigrades exist, which behave like a light oil at low temperature, but as they warm up, they act like they were a heavier oil. This is done because viscosity index by its lonesome cannot do the whole job. Can anyone remember a poor, overworked 6-volt starter trying to start an engine in 30 below?
Well, not 30 below. I can't say that.
But cold enough to make a big difference. And you think it's not, it can't happen. Well, they devised an amazing system to further broaden the viscosity range of an oil such that it would be viscous enough at operating temperature to handle all the normal loads and yet would not solidify or become so thickened at lower temperatures as to make the engine unstartable.
Is this non-Newtonian? I've heard of non-Newtonian fluids. There's a
Yes, well,
there's an armor that is easy to deform at low speed. So if you, it's a body armor D3O, and this goo they call it. You stick your finger in it slowly, and it's easy to deform. If you hit it with a hammer, it does not deform. So you have this,
silly putty.
yeah, you have this compliant, easy to move armor, but when it's called to duty by velocity, it firms up and absorbs the impact. Non-Newtonian. It just sounds the opposite of your expectation is what I would just put
You
non-Newtonian on everything.
you may have to look at your assailant and see what weapon he's carrying.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Or can't you here? Let me lend you mine. You got the drop on me. Well, what they hit upon was we'll start with a base oil that is very light, has a low viscosity, and we'll add chemistry to it that causes it to lose less viscosity as it warms up than it would if it were a single weight light base oil. And this takes the form of long chain molecules, which in low temperatures become more compact. They roll up in a ball and make almost no contribution to viscosity. The 5-weight oil in your crankcase pours, it pumps, and at that temperature it lubricates perfectly well because it has the viscosity needed to support the loads. Wheel goes the starter. Brum. Ah, yes,
Make
indeed.
sure your terminals are tight.
Yep. And as the engine warms up, those rolled up in a ball, long chains begin to extend themselves. And they do so at a rate such that their contribution to viscosity keeps up with the needs of the loads in the engine for which it was designed. Now, this is all very well if the long chains remain long. And there are a number of different chemistries that are used for this, and some are El Cheapo and don't last all that long, and some are more expensive, or at least they charge more for them, and they last longer. So if those long molecules begin to break up under the constant shear stress of what's happening in bearings between pistons and cylinder walls, all those molecules are tumbling and rubbing against each other and frankly being sometimes torn to pieces. This is called falling out of grade. And oil analysis people will be glad to tell you if this is happening. You send them some of your used oil, they check it out, and they draw the conclusion that the viscosity improving agent, the VI improver, this long chain molecule that rolls up into a ball when it's cold, as do cats on a sofa. Those have broken. And so their average length is not up to the task, and your engine is under lubricated once it's warmed up.
So this is a good time to pause for oil change interval. And, there's lots of different advice out there. Number one, you can follow your manufacturer motorcycle handbook and you'd be pretty safe with that. You could knock it down a little if you're, like, well, I ride hard or etc. What Kevin said in the Sport Bike Performance Handbook that I reviewed when I was an editor at Cycle News, when that book was published in
Cycle News.
98, 97, when that came out,
Back
I
there,
think.
yeah.
Um, Kevin had a section in the Sport Bike Performance Handbook that talked about oil change interval, and one of the points he made is said you could reduce your interval to every 5 minutes, and things would be wonderful in your engine, wouldn't they? So it is great to do an analysis. You don't have to analyze it every time. You just need to analyze it a few times. And you don't even have to do a complete oil change. You could just drain some off and then stick the plug back in real quick and see where you
Yep.
stand before you change it. Because, this fancy stuff that we put in power sports, motorcycle things,
Oh,
boy, you can spend a lot of money on a quart of oil.
yep.
Used to buy 12 quarts for $10 for the old Triumph TR6 back in the day. It's different now, but it's good to know the truth. The analysis is there. It's affordable. It's $40 or less. You mail it in a pouch, and they send you back information.
Yep.
Carry on.
Information, good to have. And falling out of grade is just one of a variety of problems that an oil can suffer. Now, let's think about and there's of course something that went along with this multi-grade business, and that is that Junior Johnson, stock car builder, felt that there was too much energy going into banging oil around inside of his engines, and he wanted to reduce the bearing clearance and reduce the viscosity of the oil. And he went to talk to old timers, and they said, "Oh yeah, we used to do that all the time with the big radial engines. We finished the crank pins with a process called Chrysler Super Finish, which produced a truly cylindrical, not just shiny, truly cylindrical surface with very low surface asperities." And that allowed the use of low viscosity base stock because uh, it it would let the surfaces touch if they were as rough as production parts before that time. Honda introduced this super finish on Goldwing cranks in '76, so that's been a while. But the idea is, if the surfaces are very smooth, you can allow the minimum oil film at the point of tremendous load to become thinner than normal and still carry the load properly. And that is where these crazy oils with 0W10 and so forth have originated. And as Mark was pointing out, in some cases, the manufacturer of the vehicle has adopted that oil officially to make emissions, to reach some level of something that they measure. And in fact, it might be better for your engine to go up one level of viscosity to be sure. This is a claim that is made. So, what the numbers mean, a 5W20 means that at 0 degrees, it behaves like a 5-weight oil at that temperature, but that it behaves like a 20-weight oil at boiling water temperature, roughly 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 212. And that is not, it doesn't mean that it's getting more viscous as it heats up. It just means that it is not losing viscosity as fast as it otherwise would. So we have the viscosity index to begin with, which was the reason why everyone raved about Pennsylvania crude, because oils made from that crude had higher viscosity indices than crudes from other fields. And now people know enough to be able to say what is good in an oil, and that's what is an ideal molecule. They found out that long straight chains either formed crystallites or became thicker and thicker at an alarming rate as they grew cooler. So let's put those aside. They found that ring compounds, such as benzene is one that has 6 carbons in a ring, weren't so hot because they were so often heteroatoms, atoms other than the ones you want to be there associated with them. So what they were left with was certain branched chain structures that were the ideal molecule. And the polyalpha olefin base oil that is used to make Mobile 1 and other PAO based oils is, instead of being refined from crude oil, it is synthesized from smaller pieces that are polymerized together to produce branch chains where the chains are of a desired length. And how do they do all of this? They do it with catalysts.
It sounds like the digital versus analog audio argument. It really does. Because what I will say is I have an associate, a friend who's a street freestyler. So he's intimate with how to use a clutch. His clutch control obviously is among the best in the world. And he does many, many interesting things with his clutch and engine power and torque, wheelies, stoppies, you name it, all the stuff going on. And he's a connoisseur of the engagement point in the clutch. And he says he doesn't like 100% synthetic. He likes a blend because there's something in the natural oil that gives him a better feel and a better engagement in that window. And to me it's like, well, I like listening to vinyl because it has infinite vibrations, and you know it's not just parsing out the hertz and delivering them without without background noise.
And how do you know that it hasn't been digitally compressed? Which
Yes.
means throwing away little nuances that you want to hear.
Oh, that's when the compression is why radio sounds so bad. That's
Yeah,
they used to, yeah. I mean, it's
this
yeah,
averages out to this, so forget that. We'll just
yeah. You don't need it.
don't need it. So they produce this wonderful molecule, which has a very high viscosity index, up 130, 140. And because it is synthesized from small mers, isomer, polymer, little units, there are no heteroatoms. There's no nitrogen, no sulfur, no metals attached. There are no aromatic compounds with their weak bonds that are subject to oxidation. So this oil, this PAO base stock, is much more resistant to gum and varnish formation and to loss of its properties because there's nothing in there but what is intended to be there. And of course, I have my tiresome way of talking about this, which is the drill sergeant wishes that every soldier was like the 17th guy in the line here. He's not too tall. He's in real good shape. He's a smart guy, but he knows how to take orders. Not too troublesome, and a very capable person. Why can't they all be like him? And PAOs is an approach to producing an army of identical, highly capable molecules. And this is, it's great to have oils that resist oxidation. I messed around with a 1940 Chevy when I was in high school. And when I lifted the valve cover off, it was like a horror movie. Hanging curtains of black sludge, some of which dropped off as I lifted the thing. Oh, maybe I should just put it
No,
back.
I bought a 1958 Triumph Trophy that had been parked for decades. The story was the owner had uh, kickstarted it and it broke his foot, and so he just kind of leaned it up against the wall. And what I found is that one of the exhaust push rods, exhaust valves had seized and broken the push rod and kind
Mm.
of buggered up the rocker arm. So it was hard to kickstart because compression must have been, 400 psi on that one because it was not letting it go anywhere, so it was very
Yep.
hard to kick. And anyway, by the time I got it, it needed a top end, and I'm like, well, I'll get through that. And I took the oil tank off. I looked inside and I said, wow, it still has oil. It wasn't oil. It was a waxy substance, black and
Yes.
terrible at the bottom of the oil tank, and it took a lot of physical removal. I took a plastic handle from a spatula. The spatula was long gone, but it was just a long plastic stick. I knew it wouldn't scratch anything, and I just started chipping away, putting a little solvent, trying your various acetones and lacquer thinners, and oh gosh, maybe some MEK.
I'm
Save the
very
MEK for
sympathetic. I'm very sympathetic because yesterday my wife's mowing tractor ran out of gas, and one of the sons smelled the different fuel drums, and the one that smelled most like gasoline was diesel. So I was called upon to remove every bit of that diesel from the tank, the lines, the pump, the float bowl, etc.
Oh boy,
And of course, then it started and ran fine. But there was much between.
hard to light. Gosh,
So, better to create these ideal soldier oils that are strongly resistant. Their carbon to carbon and carbon to hydrogen bonds are not susceptible to oxidation because there aren't any ring structures that have those weak bonds holding them together where oxygen can get in there and nibble on it. So we don't have that horrible problem with this new type of oil. So to remove the vulnerable ring compounds, they at first used solvent extraction. Well, here's a solvent that favors this stuff. So we'll mix it together, then we'll recover the solvent with the undesired aromatics. And it would reduce the population to a certain degree.
Kevin,
And
I just want to say that if only you had been around during my chemistry class in high school and my ensuing chemistry classes in college, I might have had a much better time, and my topics would have been a lot more relevant to my enthusiasms. So I appreciate this very much. I also like your graphic representation or audible representation of oxidization. Taking a bite. Arr.
chewing in there.
Yep.
Well, the central problem of petroleum derived oils is excessive diversity. So many different molecular species, so many heteroatoms, so many contaminants of various kinds. And the refining process usually meant for so many years taking out the stuff that was bad and burning it for process heat. But then chemists began to say, we've been doing some great stuff with catalysts for a number of years. Why don't we just make a catalyst that will bite into those ring compounds and open them up into a straight chain? And then we can reform them chemically by passing them through processes that we have developed to make them into the ideal lube oil molecule. Now, this business of developing catalysts, our bodies are filled with catalysts and they are called enzymes. If your body does not produce lactase, which is an enzyme that helps to disassemble the milk sugar lactose. Then you have lactose intolerance. And these enzymes are fiendishly clever. They have shapes that are intimately complementary to the shapes of the substrate molecule on which they are supposed to act. And they assemble in the mad thermal confusion of the reactor. They assemble the sensitive bond in the substrate molecule is deformed by the catalyst in such a way that the desired change is much more likely to take place. And some of them are so marvelously specific. How, by what process could these extremely clever things be created? Well, if you've got 1 billion years, a lot of things become possible that the human lifespan regards as laughably unlikely.
Well, we're very good at
So,
accelerating things though, aren't we? We can hit the pedal to the
yes,
metal if we start thinking about it. It's pretty cool.
yes, indeed. So, one of the other things that we want from a lube oil is that if the oil film breaks down, as it does during cold starting, what's going to protect the surfaces from each other? And people in the oil industry discovered early on that most of the wear that takes place during startup. What a tedious thing. But they also knew that certain oils, such as the oil of the castor bean, are highly polar. Each molecule is electrically neutral, but the charge is the positive and the negative are not located together. They're located at some distance apart. So there are positive and negative fields around these things, and they can induce the opposite in metal surfaces, and that makes them stick. Castor oil is supreme at this. And diesters were designed to have this property, which is why when polyalpha olefins are found not to make a successful oil because they are nonpolar, they just mix some diesters with it. Presto, all the good stuff.
We like our
Diesters
ZDDP
are
too, or
synthetic to begin with. In the early days of gas turbines, when Frank Whittle, for example, was performing his experiments and driving himself close to madness because the Royal Air Force said, well, it was your duty to design the jet engine. We'll take it now, thank you. They had mineral oil. In the 1950s and afterward, they used these diester oils because they were polar. They stuck to surfaces. And then sometime in the 1960s, they came up with neopentyl polyol esters, which had wonderful properties, including the one that the gas turbine people are especially interested in, and that is strong resistance to degradation from heat. And I have a little box up in the shop filled with Neo two-stroke oil. I never actually used any, but I bought a little box of it. And it's just the third generation gas turbine oil. Well, other things to prevent cold start, exaggerated wear are anti-wear materials such as, what was it? TCP. At the end of the 1950s, one of the oil manufacturers advertising that their gasolines contain tricresyl phosphate. It's a very aggressive anti-wear that I guess it had the property of increasing bearing clearances. So it was discontinued, but they've got 1 million others because these catalyst people, they're They're very creative.
Well, widely known ZDDP, zinc diethyl alkali phosphate.
Yes.
Something like- don't don't use too much anymore for protection of your catalytic converter, but your flat tapping
And
engines love it.
now for further evidence of that humans are fascinated by problems and just won't let go of them until they've come up with a solution, are these clathrate-based catalysts. The clathrate is a cage molecule, and they can create these molecules with a door, an opening. The opening is of a size it can be tailored to admit only molecules of the desired size. And they can then approach on its throne the catalyst metal itself and be thereby altered into a different form and then exit to make room for others coming in for the same treatment. This is wonderful stuff. A box that only lets in molecules of the desired size. Well, nature, of course, having had all that R&D time, creates these shapes that are impossibly closely complementary so that there's no ambiguity. People lacking the key are not admitted to this club. Well, these wonderful polyalpha olefin plus diester oils are, such as Mobile One, are the current big noise in the night. It probably won't remain that way forever. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say about multigrades. People were critical of multigrades because when the oil is spread out on the cylinder wall during the power stroke and into the exhaust stroke, what is happening to that layer of oil? The most volatile parts of the oil, i.e. the base stock, are evaporating. They're becoming unburned hydrocarbons, which are now being merrily pumped out into the exhaust system. So there was some flap about that. The diesel people were very suspicious of multigrades. What's going to happen to my top piston rings? What's going to
Air-cooled
happen?
motorcycle guys are real suspicious of it, and frankly, changing oils on the Norton 850 that I rode quite a bit. Once I found an oil that was pretty suitable for it, it did not gas off. It did not, quote, evaporate. I was consuming less oil by changing the oil that I was using in my Norton Commando.
Okay. Well, I have a photograph here someplace showing one of the great racing teams of the 1950s at the Nürburgring. And there is the head of the MV team with a 1-gallon tin that has had the side cut off of it. He is preheating oil to be poured into the race machines because they didn't have the viscosity index and they did not have the multigrade oil. So the way to deal with cold starting is to turn it into warm starting with preheated oil.
My favorite racing oil of all time, I saw at Laguna Seca. It was the Vance and Hines team, and they were without an oil sponsor. And so they had bottles of oil that had tape on the labels, and they'd written fast oil, apply now.
Yes. Well, then there was my friend Ron Burns, um, who's missed the last 25 years, who raced two strokes, and he was very amused by the constant parade of new two-stroke oils, each claiming more power, better fuel economy, and longer life.
Smokeless.
And so he bought bottles of Marvel Mystery Oil, the red and black. He poured away the mystery oil and filled it up with Yukon fluid, which was the basis for many of those two-stroke oils back in the late 60s and 1970s, and stood them about his pit area when he went to the races. And people would say, "Oh, what's that? What's that oil you're using there, man?" And he'd say, "It's a mystery." He would go in for elaborate self-amusements like that. It was a feature of his personality. Anyway, let's see. Well, it turns out that synthesis is not the only pathway to the ideal lube oil molecule. There's also processes of reforming existing molecules, and they all depend on catalysts, like everything in the petroleum industry now. And it turns out possible to make those same ideal molecular shapes with the closely controlled branch chains and the other features that give them extraordinary viscosity index and resistance to thermal degradation and all the rest of it, but made by not by synthesis, but by reforming existing molecules. And of course, who was motivated to make this, to travel this path? The established producers of petroleum-based oils. And because here the PAO-based stuff is taking bites out of their market, let's have a big meeting of chemists and see if we can do this. Turned out they could. Now they're doing it. And this is just something that it's important to know about, that there are mineral originated oils that are of extremely high quality, have competitive viscosity index, have competitive resistance to oxidation, and all the rest of it. So where there's a will, which often means millions and millions of dollars, there's a way. And the oil industry has never been lacking for R&D funding. And so I'm somewhat reminded when I think about these chemists, people spend their lives doing this, of Charlie Chaplin's movie Modern Times, in which he works on a production line. He's tightening bolts. Ratchet wrench. Next. And when he goes home at night, he can't stop making these motions, and it creates social problems. Well, I'm imagining the chemist who spends his days with these mouth-filling descriptions, these names, chemical names, and all of these complicated processes. And when he gets home, he suddenly barks out, pentaerythritol, tetranitrate, or 2,2,3-trimethylbenzene.
And he's
And
sitting
his
alone on
family he
the
gets like
swing at
this
a party.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets like this. And explosive outburst syndrome, I think they call it. So I wish those people well. When you work in one of those abstruse fields, what do you do for small talk at home, at the dinner table, watching TV afterwards? Got to be careful.
I loved what
Don't
you
bring your
put.
problems home.
No, I loved what you put in the notes. Here's a line I love from the Handbook of Petroleum Refining Processes, edited by Robert A. Myers, on such processes. The most relative class of lube oil molecules is that which contains nepentho-aromatic groups. Combination of isodewaxing and hydrofinishing completely saturates these reactive compounds to impart high stability to the base oil.
Thank you.
High five!
Yeah.
Let's party.
But
do another shot.
yeah. The great thing about this, though, is that I got interested in aviation fuel many years ago, and I found some stuff that I could read about it that was written in a fashion that a person lacking a specialized education could pretty much get. And since then, I've tried to sort of peck away at this stuff because I really want to get some, however vague, understanding of what goes on in the petroleum business, and I think it's quite grand. Of course, nobody wants a refinery on next door. There they are on the Gulf Coast. There they are in New Jersey and other places. But we can't get along without them. And even if we go to all electric cars tomorrow, what are we going to do for petroleum derived chemicals? Well, we could synthesize them, just like synthesizing polyalpha olefin, oil based stock. It's going to take power. Well, when renewable sources have become so abundant that there's a vast surplus, why would they create a vast surplus unless they had a buyer lined up? Well, you know, I do, or at least I suspect it's going to take a lot of organization to make
It's
this
a co
happen.
it's a complex party, isn't it?
But it could happen. The chemists could make anything you want. Some will cost more than others. Right now, mostly comes out of petroleum. So, the human plight. We're doing things the easy way now. We may have to do it the hard way. We know how. We just don't have the power right now. But great to think of what a difference between being unable to start your car because the oil in the cylinder and on the rings in the cylinder wall has become a solid. Take hold of the crank, put your back into it, no movement. Let's get clever. We pour a little gasoline into each cylinder. Step by step to the present time, my wife loves digital fuel injection because it means it's 20 below zero. You want to go shopping, you put the key in and turn, and the engine starts. And the idle RPM is controlled. There's no fussing with a choke lever or any of that business. This is very convenient. It's grand.
It is. The fuel control alone has changed the life of your oil,
Yes,
as
because
has been ring sealing, as has been all the I am a combustion chamber snob from rebuilding old air-cooled engines and finally finding the recipe with a Nikasil bore and a bore plate and a nice piston with a good tight clearance that you can get away with because everything is accurate, and having the oil in an air-cooled motorcycle, dare I say Velocette, stay golden honey colored for close to 2,000 miles, whereas in the old
that's
days
wonderful. Yeah.
when the cylinder wasn't round and the piston was round, which it isn't supposed to be, all of
Yes.
those problems, the oil would be black in 500 miles. The less. It just all the junk getting past the rings, and then you're using a carburetor, a slovenly carburetor spitting God knows, just I mean, I love carbs, don't get me wrong. Even a CV carburetor I like.
Rich in summer, lean in winter,
Oh, go high, go low, changing, it's
which is
so
why there are all those great photographs of Kel Carruthers and others looking at spark plugs through a little magnifier, peering
window into combustion.
to get an understanding of what the mixture is and whether you've got ideal timing or if you're a little retarded or if you're a little over. It's on there. It can tell you the story, but we don't need that anymore. Spark plugs stay in the engine for the life of the engine practically.
100,000
And
miles. Easy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and uh, these engines today are ideally managed. They don't overheat. They, uh, oil is constantly circulating. their fuel and combustion are being ignition timing are being managed by maps. So a lot of things that used to be covered, but well, we'll just jet it a little rich and it'll be okay. Now you can't do that anymore because the EPA will not let that car be sold until it passes. So it's
I did find out that new cars are liars though, Kevin. I didn't
yes,
know this, but as I was doing research, I about engine temperature gauges and other things, a guy I know is a car engineer, and he said, "Oh yeah, we run the temperature gauge at normal in the bottom third all the time, unless there's a massive deviation,
mm,
because we don't want to get all the complaints that it's running hot." Because it really isn't running hot. If you let the gauge do the job now with, so call it the average consumer, whoever that is, and it fluctuates, people get panicked. So they just hold the needle. And then if it gets really bad, they say, hey, you got a problem, take care of
yeah,
it.
wonderful.
And
We
then
need
even
to know this. Well,
some of the electric car people don't, they'll have a, they're speaking with the vehicle over the interwebs, right? They understand what's happening with the vehicle as you're driving it down the road, and it will throw a code to them, but not to you. And they'll know that there's a problem with your vehicle. They will not contact you. If you contact them and complain, then they will take care of it. That is where we are on,
yeah.
on managing your maintenance costs as a manufacturer. What are your warranty costs? How much labor are you putting into the vehicle after the sale to make it right?
In 1944, the B-29 force had been sent to India, and it was flying bombs and fuel over the hump into China
Mm.
so that they could roughly uh, 7 flights to transport enough tonnage for one mission against Japan. And they were having terrible problems with short engine life, with in flight fires, with engines quitting on takeoff and causing crashes. Uh, the manufacturer, Wright, sent a an engineer, Frank Larry, Lary, to India to scope this out. Just hang around the shops and see what's happening. And so he's looking over all these piles of reports. Engine temperature is always in the green. So finally, he went up to a crew chief that he'd gotten friendly with, and he said, "What is this with always in the green like this? We know that the exhaust ports are ovalizing or they're translating to one side, so you've got only 1 or 2 points of contact. The valve overheats, chunks fall out, the jug is jacked off the engine, and then the thing catches fire." He said, "Oh, we got orders to do that. They don't want these units to look like they're deviants. So we got a memo that said, forget what the actual temperature is. It's not important. Just write these numbers in." Aha. Here he was wasting all this time reading these after flight reports when, and he knew that the problems were real because there were piles of wrecked engines. And then he found out that the information on the cause was not making it back to the manufacturer because it would look bad.
Yeah, there was I think it was a Kawasaki Ninja 900. It was a Kawasaki, and the gauge was sort of running in the middle, I guess. It was running higher than you might expect your normal. We seem to run them in the bottom third. That was, if it says normal, it's on the O. It's
Yeah.
not on the L. L seems abnormal. That seems on the hot side. And there was a gauge that was reading high, and they were getting a lot of complaints about it. And there was a warranty fix. And then I don't think it was a recall, but the fix was putting a resistor on the wire going to the gauge so that it would read lower. That fix the problem.
Wonderful. Sure.
It is, it's great. I don't know how that has anything to do with synthetic oil or but,
Well, it's like politics. It's expensive to fix the actual problem, but making people feel better about it is less expensive. And how much could the resistor cost?
well, it's easy to write the check while you're in office if it gets cashed or you're projecting that it'll get cashed 10 years after you're
Yep,
finished.
for
So,
sure.
all right, folks. Well, that was great, Kevin. It makes me wanna go change the oil on my pickup and put fresh oil in the Velocette because I'm sure that's been in there too long.
I want to see that amber colored oil for
It
2,000 miles. That's a
it
great
really
story.
is. Well, I
Something to
posted
aspire to.
it is. I posted a picture of that to the Velocette group, and, one of the guys in the club said, "That engine has never been in a Velocette," or excuse me, "That oil's never been in a Velocette engine."
Yeah, great.
And, it's because I had the timing cover off, and, when you're setting the timing, you have to have the timing cover off when you're doing the automatic timing device, and you're wedging open the weights so it's maximum advance, and then you're turning the damn thing on the straight on the taper, there's no key because you have to be able to turn it in fine increments and then tap it on and tighten your nut, and then did it slip or didn't it slip? And you recheck it again. So you have the timing cover off to do all this, and of course, all you could see in all the little nooks and topographies of the, African continent, as they say about the timing cover of the Belisette, was all this golden hues, and then the aluminum is just as clean as can be because it was immaculately cleaned the last of many times I've done a rebuild on it, which has been
Yeah.
together for a long time now. But there it was, and he said, "Well, that oil's never been in a Belisette, this golden hue." It's great. It's just it's so nice when as we've discussed many times, is that you hammer the problem and you try to figure out what it is and you keep working and you get a result that you desired. It's as Kevin has put in the past with me many times. He calls it getting what you came for.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So it's it's getting what you came for. Well, thanks for listening, folks. We always enjoy our time together with you. Thank you, Kevin, yet again for another ding dong battle with interesting vocabulary. It makes me want to do a vocabulary episode, and we can just start with asperities, capital
I
A.
didn't mention this excrescences once.
Nope. Well, we'll start with A, and we'll go to Z, and we'll try to do motorsports related vocabulary one of these times. I think
There.
it'd be a worthy hour. Thanks for
All
listening.
righty.